there's this idea going around the internet that the Catholic Church has not always been against abortion, or that the teaching of the Church on abortion has not always been so clear, that there's been room, even in Catholic circles, for disagreement around this issue. That's simply false. The prescription against abortion in the Catholic Church is actually one of the oldest moral teachings that we have. We can trace it all the way back to the first century. There's this ancient document called the Didache, or the Teaching of the 12 Apostles. It's actually the oldest catechetical text that survives. It was written in the final decades of the first century. So there are some that think it actually predates the book of Revelation in the New Testament. So it's that old. It's that old, and it articulates some of the earliest catechetical teachings of the church, some liturgical teachings, how to perform baptisms, but also some moral teachings. And in there's a section on the commandment to love thy neighbor. And it expounds upon that a little bit, like what does it mean to love thy neighbor? And one of the things that it specifically mentions in there is that you should not kill a child in the womb by abortion. And abortion's nothing new. It's been around for a long time. But already in the very first catechetical document that's being circulated among the early church, abortion is mentioned by name as something that goes against the commandment to love your neighbor and that cannot be tolerated in the Christian community. In fact, I'm thinking back in history, one of the early hallmarks of Christians is that they would save babies that had been abandoned by Roman pagans. The ancient Romans had their form of abortion too, but their preferred method of getting rid of a child that they didn't want was to go ahead and give birth to that child, which is much safer for the woman than anything that would try and abort that child while she's still pregnant. She'd go ahead and give birth to that child, but then if they didn't want that child, they would kill it by exposure. It was a form of infanticide. So instead of killing the child directly, I guess in an attempt to keep their hands clean, they would simply leave the child out in the elements and it would die. So that was fairly common practice among the Roman pagans. And Christian families would go and they would find these children and they would adopt them. They would bring them into their homes. And sometimes these children would even be, deformed. They would suffer from deformities. And that might be why the family had left that child for exposure. But the Christians would bring them in and raise them and love them. And that was one thing that Roman writers would remark about this new sect called Christians, right? They would say, we don't know about this Jesus that they worship, but look at how they love one another, and look at how they love even these weak, helpless infants that had been discarded by their families. They're taking them in and they're raising them. So the church has always been pro-life, and of course continues to be. In Pope Francis, even as recently as this year, has continued to condemn abortion as evil, as a moral evil. So the church has always been against abortion. Now, you may hear people say that, some medieval theologians thought that life didn't begin until what they call quickening, or it was uncertain when life began in the womb. President Biden made comments like this a couple of months ago, that the church has, determined that when life begins is an open question. And he even cited St. Thomas Aquinas for that. And that's unfortunate, to drag a saint's name through the mud to suggest that. Where are they getting this from? Well, medieval theologians, did remark, and it's not just St. Thomas Aquinas, it's others, that when life began in the womb was kind of an open question, because their knowledge of embryology and fetal development was, pretty limited. I mean, they didn't have ultrasounds, they didn't have x-ray machines. What was going on in a mother's womb was a bit of a mystery. And so they would speculate, like, when they knew that life began when God fused a human soul, a soul, with the body that was in the womb. Theologically, that's when we can speak of life beginning. And when did that happen? Well, they would speculate, maybe at that moment of quickening, when the mother first can begin to feel the child move in her womb. Maybe that's it, right? So that's where that language of quickening is coming from. But nowhere in the writings of St. Thomas Aquinas, nowhere in the writings of any medieval theologian that I'm aware of, and certainly not in any magisterial teaching of the church, has it even been suggested that it would be okay to kill a child in the womb if it was early enough, before quickening or before installment or before whatever, principally because we didn't really know when installment, occurred. Today, with the technology that we have and our knowledge of embryology and fetal development that we have, we can see that there's always life there, that there's always growth there, that it's not just some formless lump of cells that one day becomes a human being, but it's a human being from the moment of conception. And so the church has said, well, yes, from the moment of conception, we definitely have a human person there that needs to be protected. But more to the point, even before we knew that, we knew that there was always at least a potential for an ensouled human life, a human person, to be present in the womb. And even if it's only potential, we need to protect that. So the church has never, never, never said that abortion might be morally permissible in certain stages of pregnancy. She's always, since the very first century, held abortion to be a grave sin.